In 1920, when the Bolshevik forces launched the summer offensive and when the forces reached the outskirts of Warsaw, the Polish capital was not the only major city which was in danger. Another city which the Bolsheviks tried to seize at the same time was the city of Włocławek. But the Włocławek population and the Polish army defending the city were eager to fight. Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. The Battle of Warsaw 1920 was without any doubt the most important clash during the Polish-Bolshevik War. It was the decisive battle of this war, and this is the reason why almost every Pole knows that it was fought in 1920 and that it was fought during the clash against the Bolsheviks. But if we ask a Pole or even a foreigner what were the other battles fought during this war, the answers would be probably I don't know. And at the same time that this battle was fought, there was another clash between the Polish and the Bolshevik troops. Further north, at the city of Włocławek, the Bolsheviks tried to seize the bridge on the Vistula River and to take the city. But the Włocławek defenses stood firm and managed to repulse the Bolshevik attack. And today I'd like to present you a game which will be covering those events. This will be the review of the game called Bitwa o Włocławek 1920, the Battle of Włocławek 1920. The game was published in 2020, so 100 years after the battle was fought, by the Polish foundations Ładowarka and Ari Ari. It was at the same time part of a project called Pamięć o przeszłości dla przyszłości, remembering the past for the future. So this is a project which major objective was to give more insight about the battle, to make people remember that this battle was fought. It was an educational project, it was a historical project, and this was its main purpose. The authors of this game were Tomasz Wąsik and Jakub Szachewicz, although the game was designed by a whole bunch of people which were designing it during the first part of 1920 in order for the game to be ready for the anniversary of the battle in August 2020. Today I'd like to show you this game, I'd like to briefly explain how it works, and at the end I'd like to give you my final thoughts and my final recommendation concerning this game. So let's begin. Here is a brief look at Bitwa o Włocławek 1920 or the Battle of Włocławek 1920. This is a game for 2 players, but the rules say that you can play this game also, for instance, in a group of 3 or 4 players. In such a scenario, both sides will simply choose a certain number of units from both sides that they will be controlling. It's of course also possible, for instance, to decide that one of the players will control, for instance, the units which are in one location, the other will take control of the others. So we have 2 sides in this game, because this is a game about a clash, a battle between the Polish and Bolshevik forces. And the Polish units in this game will be the blue ones, the Bolshevik forces, as you might suppose, will be the red ones. The objective of the game is different for both sides. The main objective for the Bolsheviks is to seize the bridge on the Vistula River. This is the only bridge on the Vistula on this map, which enables them to enter the city of Włocławek. And the game can end due to sudden death. Firstly, if the Bolsheviks manage to occupy at least 4 hexes of the city of Włocławek before the game ends.
The Poles have an opportunity to end the game due to sudden death if they manage to push back the Bolshevik forces north of the Witoszyn-Fabianki line, so up to the northern edge of the map board. This is very improbable, so this scenario won't happen unless the Bolshevik player really plays very, very badly. If neither side achieves their victory conditions before the end of the game, we decide the outcome of the battle after the 24th stage. At this point, we just check if we have at least one Bolshevik unit on the southern part of the Vistula River. So if at least one Bolshevik unit managed to cross the river and stay alive until the game's end. If it did, the game ends by a Bolshevik victory. If we have absolutely no Bolshevik units on the southern part of the Vistula River, it's the Poles who emerge victorious. Now, as you can see, the battle will be fought on a map depicting Włocławek and majorly the northern part to the north of the city. The sole bridge is the strategical objective of the Bolshevik forces. So at the game's start, the Polish forces are deployed in Włocławek itself alongside the bank of the river, and also they have a defensive perimeter on the other side of the Vistula River. They occupy Szpital Dolny, Szpital Górny, Kolonie Grodzkie, and they form a defensive perimeter. The Bolshevik forces enter the map from the northern edge, and they will be at most times using the entrance near Cyprianka or Chełmica, and they will be moving southwards. Then the direction of the Bolshevik offensive will depend on the plan of the Bolshevik player. They can try to push the Polish forces to Szpital Dolny and attack the bridge surroundings. They can also try to counter the Polish defenses from the west or from the east. In this example, this is turn 8 of the game, the Bolsheviks decided to pass around the Polish defenses and to close to the Vistula River from the eastern side. So this is an approach you can decide different strategies each time you play. The map is a map on which you have a hexagonal grid, as you can see. This is important because each hex is numbered. This is important in terms both of the initial setup as also in terms of reinforcements which will enter the game on different stages. The problem with this hexagonal grid and with the numbers is that the numbers come from one side and they turn to the other. So for instance, we have hex 804 next to hex 735 because as I said earlier, the numbers will bring you to one side of the board and they will continue from this side to the other. So this is not very helpful, and when searching for a specific hex, it's sometimes very difficult to find it. Additionally, some hexes, for instance wood hexes, also have numbers, but they are printed in black, so it's really difficult to say what hex it is. You really have to carefully look at it and search for the corresponding number. Additionally, the problem with this map is that you do not have any explanation concerning how to read certain hexes, how to interpret what type of hex are they. Because we have, for instance, hexes which are flat terrain and river hexes, or we have hexes which are partly wooden hexes and flat hexes, and additionally with a road which crosses those hexes in a very bizarre way. We have some streams which do not pass through the sides of the hex as in most war games, but they pass sometimes through, for instance, the middle of a hex or through a small part of this hex. So we do not actually know how to treat such hexes because the rules do not explain it. This is due to the fact that I believe that the map board itself was created by using a map created in the 1930s and on which a hexagonal grid was superimposed. But this created a lot of problems and unfortunately they weren't explained in the rules. When it comes to the terrain types, well, we have some flat terrain, we have some woods, we have some major roads and smaller roads, but as you can see, their color is very similar to flat terrain, so this is another issue. It is difficult sometimes to spot a road. It is difficult to tell if this is a road or this is not a road. Sometimes you might be surprised to find that your opponent moves quicker through some hexes because there is a road that you didn't see, for instance, when playing with artificial light. But okay, this concerns the map itself. Now let's take a look at some of the counters. We have several types of units in the game. We have infantry units, we have cavalry units. The cavalry units are units which can both be mounted and unmounted, especially on the Bolshevik side. This of course increases their mobility if they are on the mounted side. Each unit has its designation, so the formation from which it comes from. It has also a mobility factor. As you can see, no strength factor, and additionally, the problem is that the information about the unit is very, very small. And from a longer distance, it's almost impossible to be spotted. Now, this wouldn't be a major concern, a major problem, if this number would be important only in terms of initial setup, but it isn't, because in the game all units have a specific amount of strength points which will be tracked during the game on dedicated sheets, and each time a unit takes losses we just indicate it on the corresponding sheet. So each time we have a combat, each time we have an artillery attack, each time units take losses. We have to look at all the units engaged, try to figure out what type of unit it is. With the small digits it's really hard sometimes, and then we have find this unit on the corresponding sheet and indicate the number of losses that such a unit took. So this is not very easy. This is not very helpful. In terms of game mechanics, a few words about the different types of units, because I said we have infantry units, we have cavalry units. We have also some other types of units. We have machine gun units, which are extremely useful in defense because they halve opponents' strength points when attacking. We have also some artillery units. We have also some special units. We have two Vistula flotilla units, the Wawel and the Stefan Batory, which may move alongside the Vistula River and act as mobile artillery. We have also some leaders which grant a bonus to units which are inside 3 hexes of such a leader. So there are some different types of units, but they aren't very, very different because most of them work the same way. In terms of game mechanics, the game is a standard I go, you go, a game in which we have 6 phases during a turn, 24 turns. The game takes 24 turns if it is not ended due to sudden death. And during those 6 phases, firstly the Bolsheviks can move their units, then they can construct fortifications because we have fortification counters in the game. Finally, they can launch attacks and attack with their artillery. Then the Poles take the same 3 phases, so we have 6 distinctive phases during a turn. Movement is pretty straightforward. Each unit has a certain amount of movement points, as I said earlier, indicated on the counter in accordance to the terrain effect chart. We move the units spending movement points. Then we can construct fortifications. Units which didn't move can construct fortifications, and then units can attack. Attacking is also very standard. You make the sum of attacking units, you divide it by the sum of defending units. If the defending forces have machine guns, the attacking forces are halved. You then imply over modifiers due to terrain effects or fortifications or leaders involved. You find the corresponding ratio, you roll 2 dice and you search for the result. As you can see, we can have A1, A2, B1, B2 or B3 results or no effect. The digit indicates that the attacker or the defender has to retreat a given number of hexes. If it can't retreat, it takes losses. Additionally, the attacking side takes losses in accordance to the defense strength, and the defender also takes losses in accordance to the result that was obtained during the attack. So if the attacker managed to score a B1, B2 or B3 result, the defender will take additional losses. We have retreat, we have advance after combat, and that's pretty it. We have really not a lot of additional rules, so those rules govern, for instance, the destruction of the possibility to destroy the Soul Bridge on the map. We have rules governing the armored train Kaniów, which is an additional Polish asset which can be used in the game, but only, of course, alongside the only railroad which is passing through Włocławek. But apart from that, we have very straightforward rules governing the game. That's pretty it when it comes to the basic mechanics of Bitwa of Włocławek 1920. Now, I'd like to invite you to the conclusion. I'd like to share with you my thoughts about this game, and I'd like to tell you what I think are the strong but also the weaker points of this title.
Bitwa of Włocławek 1920, the Battle of Włocławek 1920, was released as an educational game, as an educational tool, which was meant to tell more about the Battle of Włocławek to both the citizens of the city as well as to other Poles. And from this point of view, this is always a thing which deserves to be underlined, which deserves to receive a thumb up, because each initiative which has for its purpose to tell about our history, to present events which happened in the past but which are often forgotten, is something very precious. And from this point of view, the Battle of Włocławek is an interesting project, and the first strong point which I'd like to strongly underline concerning this project is the idea of creating a war game, because war games and games in general can be a great educational tool, and it is an interesting approach to teaching others history, to telling them the story of your own city, of your own nation. So choosing this tool by the employees of both the foundation Ładowarka and Ari Ari was an interesting idea. I believe that their initiative to create such a game covering this battle deserves to be really underlined and to be brought to the light of day. Secondly, this game, from this educational perspective, is really does it work, because it is not only a game. You do not receive only a box inside which you have counters, a playing map, and other stuff. You receive additional educational elements. You receive a dedicated information about the Battle of Włocławek. You receive a postcard. You receive a photograph from the epoch. So a lot of additional stuff which makes you instantly learn more about this, know more about this battle, about this event. So from this point of view, the product is a high quality product, but you receive not only the game but also other elements. And at the same time, the elements which are part of the game are really quite pretty, are of a high standard. The counters do not need to be rounded. They are good in terms of their quality. Are they functional? I'll tell you a lot more about it in a few moments. But from the point of view of the quality of what you receive, you will not be disappointed. The strong point of this game, which is surely a thing which is a positive, is the fact that this is a very easy game to learn. This is a game which uses pretty much the same set of rules that the war games published in Poland in the 1990s. Even looking at the rulebook makes you instantly think of the Dragon titles, of some Mirage titles released in the 1990s. And this is a good approach in terms of bringing new players, because those games were very easy to learn. And Bitwa of Włocławek doesn't have extremely complicated rules. So the information that this is a game suitable also for players aged 9 or higher is correct. A 9-year-old can play this game and enjoy it, because the game is not extremely difficult. It's not extremely difficult to learn and to teach, although it has some blank spaces in the rules. The last thing, which is a strong point of this game, which I liked a lot, is the fact that you receive some small additional elements which add a lot of chrome to the game. So you get Polish sappers who can help you to destroy the bridge over the Vistula River if the Bolshevik troops are close to seizing it. You have the Polish Vistula ships, which can be used as mobile artillery. You have finally the armored train, which can also bring you support cruising through the railroads passing through Włocławek. So there are some small additional elements which make the game unique, which add some chrome to the game, which without those elements would be quite straightforward and very boring. Fortunately, they were added without additionally complicating the rules a lot. So what, in my opinion, are the weaker points of Bitwa of Włocławek 1920? Unfortunately, there is a lot of things which weren't resolved the way they should have been. Firstly, in terms of the quality of the components. I said that the quality of the components, when judging only their visual aspect, is correct. I like the artwork on the map, I like the colors used, I like also the quality of the counters, although there are several issues concerning both. At first, the rulebook. The rulebook, I said, is the rules of the game, as I said, are transported from the 1990s, because we have mechanical ideas which were used already in games in the 1990s. For instance, when we track the strength of the units, we will be checking additional tables which are printed inside the rulebook, so you have to copy paste them in order to use them. But this is not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that each unit has its own designation. It is part of a certain unit and bigger unit. And the number of this unit printed on the counter is so extremely small that it is extremely difficult to be read. So this wouldn't be a major issue if this number would be used only when initially setting up the game. But due to the fact that in the game we have this mechanics which requires you to change the strength of the unit each time it takes losses, you have to check for its current strength when making stacks, when using such a unit in battle, both defending and attacking. So each time you'll have to constantly check for the current strength of such a unit in the corresponding table. And in order to do so, you'll have to read the corresponding number on the counter, because each counter has its own place in a table and its own strength. So you'll have to constantly check for the strength of each unit on the map, and each time you do, you'll have to grab this counter and you'll have to closely look at it. Is this a unit with a 2 on the end, or maybe it's a 6 or a 3? I don't know. You really have to very closely look at it from a very short distance in order to see what this unit is. So this is very difficult. It reduces the fun of playing, because there will be downtimes during the game. You will constantly be feeling that those numbers are just painful, that you have to so closely look at them. And if they were bigger, if maybe the author decided to use a modern system in which the strength of the unit is printed on the counter and you have two levels, you have a full strength unit and a reduced unit, then if it takes its third loss, it is eliminated. That would be so much better. It would be so much pleasant to play. It would be so much more elegant. Now, with the current way that the game is presented, it's archaical, it's difficult to play. Additionally, we have the rules governing stack creating. You have to check again for the strength of the units, because you can create stacks in which you have 18, not more, points of strength. The units which occupy the same hex cannot have more than 18 points of strength. So again, you'll have to check for strength in those tables. The turn recall track is printed in the rulebook, so you'll have to copy paste it again if you want to use it, because I don't imagine how you can play the game having your rulebook open somewhere and then browsing through the rules is just impossible. The counters, although of a high quality in terms of how they look, they are rounded with a silhouette with those small digits, unfortunately, are not extremely sturdy. So if you happen, for instance, to use those sheets with the strength tables and to make some wind, there is a probability that some of them won't stay on the map or on the turn track if you're tracking reinforcements in such a way, and they will fly somewhere. So this is also another issue. In terms of the rules, you have blank spaces in the rulebook. Some examples were supposed to be printed, they aren't. We have some typos, we have some errors. This is not a very complicated rulebook, so not a lot of problems here, but it shows the scale of the problems concerning the quality of the global design. Then we have the map board. The map board, I said, is quite pretty, but we have several issues concerning this map. Firstly, the numbers. The numbers are printed in such a way that they start from one side of the board, they go to the other, and they turn around from this board. So when setting up the game at the start, it's sometimes very difficult to find the corresponding hex, because you absolutely do not have the idea where to search for it. So for instance, we have numbers, say 1087, and next to it you have a hex with, for instance, the number 982, and you have to constantly search for such a number. It also increases the time of setting up the game. The numbers of the counters are printed in black, so when we look at some forest hexes, those numbers are very, very hard to tell, because the woods, in some places where we have dense woods, are blackish. So the black numbers are really of the same color that the hex. It's difficult to tell what the number of the hex is. We have problems concerning the size of those hexes, because the unit counters are a little bit bigger than the hexes. So if you have several hexes occupied, one next to the other, counters will have to be placed one on another. A part of them will be overlapping. So this is also another issue. In the rules, we have information governing automatic Polish victory if there are no Bolshevik troops north of the line Witoszen-Fabianki. But you do not know what the directions are. Okay, I know where Włocławek is. I know where north is, or where it should be. But for someone who doesn't exactly know how Polish geography looks like, it will be an issue, because he won't know instantly where to look, and we do not have the directions indicated on the map. Additionally, this rule concerning automatic victory is an extremely important one, because it can end the game automatically. But the games do not tell you exactly where this line from one city to another is traced, how it is traced. Is this hex somewhere near this supposed hypothetical line, north of it or south of it? It's of a crucial importance, because if we have a Bolshevik unit somewhere there, you'll have to decide, is it north or south of this line? You do not know, because you do not know how this line is exactly traced. The roads. We have two types of roads, main roads and secondary roads. The secondary roads are almost invisible on the map. They are of a color which is almost the same as as clear hexes, and this is also problematic because sometimes you'll see your opponent moving units through some hexes. You'll scratch your head, well, why does he move them paying only one movement point? Oh, there's a road, okay, now I see it. Then we have the hexes which have, for instance, half clear hexes, which are half clear hexes and half forest hexes. How to treat them? We do not know, because the rules do not tell how to interpret such hexes, and we have tons of them. Streams sometimes cross the middle of a hex, so if I enter such a hex, do I already pay the additional movement points or only when I leave such a hex? I do not know either. The Vistula hexes, which of them are accessible to infantry or to cavalry, which aren't? If on a hex we have 1/4 of the hex with the Vistula, can I access it? If I have 3/4 of a hex occupied by the Vistula, can I access it with an infantry unit? It's also very important in terms of determining victory, because units, Bolshevik troops, have to cross the river in order to obtain automatic victory or victory at the game's end. Well, without those rules, you have to interpret, you have to judge if a hex is accessible or isn't. Then we have, for instance, rules governing changing formations from mounted to mounted troops to infantry, because cavalry troops can be dismounted and you can use them as infantry, but the side of the counter depicting infantry which was dismounted is the same as standard infantry. So then you do not know if you see a standard infantry unit or if you see a dismounted cavalry. You have to check it, then turning back the counter. When it comes to artillery can shoot at a distance of up to 20 hexes, but it shoots with the same efficiency no matter the distance, and you shoot at a specific unit on a hex. You do not shoot at a hex. So for instance, if you have a unit at a distance of 15 hexes and a unit at a distance of 2 hexes, the probability of scoring a hit and your strength will be the same. At the same time, if you have 3 units on a hex, you are choosing exactly the unit that you are trying to hit, without having a spotter and without having any other rules which tell you that you can choose a very specific unit located somewhere very far out of your line of sight. When it comes to the rules governing final victory, at the end, it's only the fact if the Bolsheviks managed to pass through the Vistula River or not that counts. So it is possible to play totally against how it went in 1920 and to immediately, playing as the Poles, you can immediately evacuate the northern part of the map and you can seek refuge on the second side of the Vistula and create a defensive line through the entire river bank. If you do, the game will enter into a stalemate up to turn 19. Yes, up to turn 19, because it's only at that moment that the Bolsheviks obtain a small additional bonus which allows them to cross the Vistula River, or to try to cross the Vistula River with a bigger number of units without having to lose half of your strength points, because up to that moment a unit crossing the Vistula River loses half of its strength points, and it can do it only on a 2-turn time scale. So you declare that you are crossing the Vistula River, the Polish player can respond, resetting his defenses, putting a machine gun unit which will further halve your attacking strength points, and only during the next turn you try to land and occupy the hex. You will be butchered because the Poles can react, the Poles can stack units on the riverbank with machine guns, and you won't succeed. It is just impossible. From turn 19 it's theoretically possible, because you will have the opportunity to cross more units without having to worry that they will be halved, but even so the game becomes very boring and very repetitive. I believe that a much better idea would be to impose victory points. You should have a certain amount of targets which could be granted victory points if controlled. For instance, the hexes next to the bridge, or szpital górny, szpital dolny, you should include victory points and still keep the automatic victory rules in the game. That would make the game much more playable. It would also be an additional motivation for the Polish player to stay on the other side of the Vistula River and to defend some crucial places, because, for instance, losing 5 victory points for Szpital just on the other side of the river would also would also change the strategy of the Bolsheviks, who would not only try to cross the Vistula at any cost, they would also try to score victory points. If, for instance, there were also victory points for units eliminated or strength points eliminated, that would further add a lot of more tactical possibilities, and it wouldn't kill the entire 19 first turns of the game. And 19 turns is a lot. There are several issues concerning this game, so I believe that it is a game using old mechanics and with some bizarre rules governing both victory conditions as also some problems concerning the maps and the counters. But having said all that, I believe that this game still has a certain value, and this value is related to its educational aspect. It's also related to the fact that this game can clearly teach you a lot about the Battle of Włocławek. Even setting up the game, taking a look at the initial situation, reading the historical booklet, taking a look at the postcard, at the additional articles which are added to the game, gives you a better insight of how the situation looked in summer 1920. So from this point of view, it's still an interesting project. It's a game, if it were to be re-released, can be a quite good game if it receives some additional changes concerning both the quality of the components and also the rules. It can be a very interesting and competitive game. The way that it was published, it's a curiosity. It's something which you can check if you are searching for something intriguing, interesting, but this won't be a very interesting game in terms of gaming. Still, as I said earlier, I'm happy that this game was released. I'm happy that such initiatives are done, because this is also a way to speak about our beautiful history. This is a way to teach history, and this is a way to reach additional potential players. This was the review of Bitwa of Włocławek 1920, the Battle of Włocławek 1920, released by Fundacja Ładowarka and Fundacja Ari Ari. Thank you a lot for watching this review. I invite you to take a look at our other videos. Take also a look at our Facebook and Instagram accounts. Have a terrific day and see you next time.